2:14 a.m. The county hospital looks awake, but it isn't. It's functioning. Fluorescent light, scuffed tile, coffee burned into the air, people moving fast without looking up. A crash cart sits crooked like someone abandoned it mid-thought. Down the trauma corridor, a low sound holds the whole floor in place. Not barking, not panic. A steady growl that doesn't rise. It just waits. Hands hover near a gurney. Nobody touches. 2 security guards stand too far back to help and too close to make it worse. A heart monitor stutters, then tries to recover. A dog's eyes track intent, not noise. One wrong step, and the room will decide something permanent. The county hospital at 2:14 a.m. wasn't asleep. It never really slept, just changed masks. By day, it wore the familiar face of routine, clipboard steps, soft-shoed nurses, the polite beep of vitals, the steady rhythm of small emergencies. By night, it became something else entirely. Fluorescent light made every surface look too honest. Every sound traveled farther. Every breath sounded like it belonged to someone who'd been awake too long. Officer Ethan Cole felt that shift the moment he pushed through the ER entrance. The air smelled like antiseptic and old coffee, like latex snapped too many times, like fear pretending it wasn't there. The waiting room was mostly empty, but the energy wasn't. It had migrated deeper, down the corridor, toward the trauma bay, toward the kind of commotion that made seasoned staff move faster and rookies freeze. Ethan's radio was still crackling with the last scraps of the call. "Hospital requesting immediate assistance," dispatch had said. "Security situation in trauma. Possible animal. K9. Aggressive. Staff unable to approach patient." The word aggressive could mean anything. A terrified family member. A drunk. A dog cornered in a place it didn't understand. But Ethan had heard the tone in the security officer's voice when they patched the call through. Controlled urgency. The kind of edge people got when they were 5 seconds away from making a decision they couldn't take back. He moved down the hall without rushing. Rushing made people mirror you, and mirrored panic was how hallways turned into stampedes. Deputy Lucas Reed met him near the double doors. Lucas looked like he'd tried to set his hair with his hands in the car and lost the argument. He was breathing a little too hard, part adrenaline, part youth, part the humiliating reality of being the youngest person in a room full of professionals who were all looking at him like he was supposed to know what to do. "Cole," Lucas said, voice low, as if the wrong volume might detonate something. It's bad." Ethan didn't ask what kind of bad. He could hear it. A raised male voice, sharp with authority. "Back up! Back up right now!" A woman's voice, pleading and strained. "We can't work like this. He's bleeding." Another voice, older, more exhausted. "If it bites someone, we—" Then the unmistakable sound of a dog. Not barking, not whining. A low growl, deep, steady, controlled. Not fear, readiness. Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly. "Where's the dog?" Lucas swallowed. "In the trauma corridor, on the gurney. Won't let anyone close. Security's thinking about— you know." Ethan heard what Lucas didn't say. Thinking about shooting it. "Who's the patient?" Ethan asked. Lucas shook his head. "I heard a federal, and then everyone started talking at once. It came in fast. 2 men dropped him off and left, like they were running." That detail mattered. Dropping a patient and running wasn't normal. Dropping a patient and leaving a dog behind in full guard mode was worse. That meant the dog had been given a single job, and the humans who usually handled the rest weren't coming back. Ethan stepped closer to the doors and stopped. He listened. The growl didn't fluctuate. That told him the dog wasn't reacting to chaos. The dog was watching for intent. Ethan looked at Lucas. "Who's holding the room?" Lucas blinked. "Hospital security. 2 guards. They've got pistols out." "Then nobody's holding the room," Ethan said. He pushed through the double doors. The trauma corridor was a tight artery of white tile and stainless steel. Curtains were pulled back, the bay half visible. A crash cart stood abandoned at an angle like it had been shoved away from something. 3 nurses hovered near the wall with their hands lifted like they'd been told to freeze. A surgeon stood at the edge of the bay, scalpel glinting uselessly in his hand, eyes fixed on the gurney like he was staring at an unexploded device. And in the center of it all, a dog, not a small one, not a house pet, not something that belonged under a child's Christmas tree. A working K9, muscle under coat, head high, eyes bright and unblinking. The dog's body was angled between the gurney and every human being in the corridor like a living barricade. Its front paws were planted close enough to touch the gurney's wheel. It wasn't pacing. It wasn't lunging. It was holding ground. On the gurney, a man lay still. His skin looked gray under the lighting. His shirt, whatever uniform it had once been, was cut open and peeled away, soaked through with blood that had turned almost black at the edges. Bandages were tight, field-fast, but they couldn't hide the shape of what lay beneath. Jagged wounds, shrapnel or something like it, tearing across his side. A heart monitor beeped. Too fast, too fragile. Ethan's gaze flicked to the dog's mouth. Teeth bared, yes, but not snapping, not frantic. A warning display, a boundary line. Hospital security stood at the far end of the corridor near the door, guns half raised, not pointed yet, but close. Close enough that one twitch of fear could turn into a tragedy. "Officer!" one guard hissed when he saw Ethan. Relief and anger in the same breath. "Get that dog out of here!" The dog's ears rotated slightly toward the voice without turning its head. The growl deepened by a fraction. Ethan didn't look at the guard. He looked at the dog. Then he lowered his hand slowly and stepped forward, one measured step stopping at the edge of the dog's boundary. "Easy," Ethan said, not to the dog yet, but to the room. His voice was calm, flat, disciplined. "Everybody lower your weapons. That includes you." The guard's jaw clenched. "He's going to bite." "No," Ethan said, still not raising his voice. "He's going to do his job, and your job right now is not to make yourself the problem." A nurse near the wall exhaled shakily. A surgeon swallowed. Lucas, behind Ethan, looked like he wanted to vanish into a supply closet. Ethan's eyes stayed on the dog. "Shadow," he said softly. The dog's gaze flicked to him. Recognition? Not yet. But attention, focused attention. Ethan didn't move closer. He let the dog decide whether he was a threat worth tracking. "Listen to me," Ethan said, voice low. "You're in a hospital. You're surrounded by strangers. I get it." The dog's growl stayed steady. No escalation. Ethan glanced at the gurney. The man's chest rose shallowly. The monitor beeped again, a tremor in the rhythm, like a warning. Time was slipping. Ethan shifted his stance, slight angle, less confrontational. He spoke again, carefully, and this time the words weren't conversational. They were precise, compact, old. A handler's recall phrase. Not a trick. Not a command you used casually. A phrase designed to cut through combat mode and trigger discipline if the dog recognized the authority behind it. Ethan delivered it like he'd practiced it, like he'd meant it. Shadow froze. The growl stopped mid-breath. For a half-second, the corridor went so quiet Ethan could hear the fluorescent lights. Then Shadow sat. Slowly. Controlled. Like a switch had been flipped inside him. He lowered his head and pressed it against the edge of the gurney, not leaving, not surrendering, just allowing. The surgeon's eyes widened. "How?" Ethan lifted one hand, not toward the dog, but as a signal to the room. "Now," he said. "Work." The trauma team moved in like a wave that had been held back by fear and finally released. Gloves snapped on. Instruments clinked. The surgeon leaned over the gurney, and Shadow's eyes tracked every motion, but no teeth, no growl, no lunge. Just vigilance. Ethan stepped to the side, keeping himself between the security guards and the dog. "Weapons down," he repeated. This time the guards obeyed. Lucas let out a breath he'd been holding too long. "Cole, what did you just say?" Ethan didn't answer, not because he didn't want to, because the answer would take time to explain, and time was currency they didn't have right now. He watched the surgeons work, and as they cut away more clothing and exposed more of the wounds, Ethan's instincts started ticking. This wasn't random. This wasn't the aftermath of a bar fight or a car wreck. The pattern, jagged but contained, concentrated in a way that suggested controlled exposure. Shrapnel, yes, but not from an IED in the street. More like training. Ethan saw the way the bandages were applied, tight, efficient, military. He saw the way the patient's jaw was clenched, even unconscious, a body trained to stay rigid through pain. And he saw something else. The dog's focus. Shadow wasn't watching the surgeons out of distrust. He was watching them like a sentry watches the perimeter, aware that the biggest danger might not come from the people closest. Ethan's gaze followed shadows. Down the corridor, near the nurse's station, a figure stood half in shadow. No scrubs, no uniform, just a dark coat and posture too still for someone who worked in a hospital. The figure wasn't watching the patient, he was watching Ethan. Ethan felt a cold thread tighten at the base of his neck. Lucas leaned close. "Who's that?" Ethan didn't answer. He took in details instead. The way the figure's hands were relaxed, not fidgeting. The way his shoulders were set. The way his eyes didn't dart. They measured. A watcher. Someone used to waiting. Ethan's radio crackled softly. He didn't look away from the corridor. "Cole," dispatch murmured. "Hospital admin requesting your location. Also, we have a report of restricted access triggered at roof entry." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Repeat that," he said. "Roof entry, like a helipad clearance." But there was no request logged. In the distance, faint through walls and glass, Ethan heard it. A low, building vibration. Rotor blades. The sound traveled through the hospital like something physical, rattling windows, shivering metal. Nurses looked up. Surgeons kept working, but their eyes flicked toward the ceiling with instinctive unease. Shadow's head lifted. He didn't bark. He didn't growl. He listened. Then he exhaled, one low sound that wasn't aggression. Recognition. Lucas's eyes widened. "That's a helicopter." Ethan's gaze locked on the dark-coated figure again. The figure's expression didn't change, but the corner of his mouth tightened as if he'd been expecting the sound and was annoyed at the timing. That told Ethan everything he needed. This wasn't a surprise arrival. This was a planned one. Ethan stepped closer to the gurney, careful not to cross Shadow's space too aggressively. The surgeon looked up, irritation flaring. "Officer, we need—" "I know," Ethan said. "How long until he's stable enough to move?" The surgeon hesitated. "He's losing pressure. We're trying to clamp internal—" Ethan's eyes flicked to the monitor. A dip, a stutter. Shadow let out a soft whine, quiet, controlled. Ethan caught the sound like a thread. Shadow's head turned, not toward the surgeon, but toward the patient's left side. The wound pattern, the placement. The pressure bandage that looked slightly too high. Ethan's instincts aligned with the dog's. "Check his left flank again," Ethan said quietly. The surgeon snapped, "We are checking everything." "Check it," Ethan repeated. Not louder, just firmer. Lucas watched Ethan, startled by the authority in his tone. The surgeon glared, then something in Ethan's eyes made him do it. He signaled a tech. They shifted, palpated carefully. A sudden curse. "Damn it!" The monitor dipped again. The surgeon's face tightened. "He's bleeding internally. We missed the pocket." Ethan felt a jolt of grim satisfaction, then immediate dread. If they'd missed that, he'd die. And if he died, everything that brought the helicopter down would still happen. Only now it would be cleaner. A dead patient couldn't talk. A dead patient was a closed report. Ethan's gaze slid once more to the corridor. The dark-coated figure had moved. Not closer, not away. Just positioned. Like a chess piece anticipating the next move. Ethan's voice dropped to Lucas. "Stay close. Eyes open. Don't leave my side." Lucas swallowed. "What is this?" Ethan's answer came out like a confession he didn't want to make. "It's not about the dog." The rotor vibration grew louder. The hospital's elevators dinged somewhere down the hall, and Ethan felt the night tighten around him, not like chaos, but like a net. The elevator doors opened with the kind of soft chime that felt wrong in the middle of a crisis. 4 people stepped out into the corridor, moving with quiet coordination. No hospital staff, no visible weapons, no obvious insignia, just posture, calm, controlled, built from rooms where people didn't ask questions. At their center was Captain Maria Hayes. She didn't look like she belonged in a hospital at 2:30 a.m., but she also didn't look surprised to be there. Her hair was pulled back. Her face was composed, pragmatic. Her eyes swept the corridor once and extracted everything important in a single breath. Blood on tile, shaken staff, security with their guns down, Ethan positioned between a K9 and the room like a human barrier. Then her gaze landed on Shadow. For the first time, something softened in her expression, not sentiment, recognition. She stepped forward, and Ethan's posture tightened. "Captain," Ethan said, voice low. "Cole," Maria answered, as if they'd met for coffee 15 minutes ago. "Talk to me." Lucas blinked. "Captain Hayes, here?" Maria's eyes flicked to Lucas. "Deputy Reed, keep the hallway clear." Lucas straightened instantly. Yes, ma'am. Maria's focus returned to Ethan. I heard you used a phrase. Ethan didn't react outwardly. I used what worked. Maria's gaze sharpened. That phrase is not supposed to exist. Behind them, the dark-coated figure, now closer, watched the exchange with clinical interest. Ethan angled his body subtly, blocking the line of sight between the figure and Maria. It was an old habit. Put yourself between threats and people you couldn't afford to lose. Maria noticed anyway. Her eyes slid to the figure, and her face hardened. Dr. Moore, she said. Dr. Lena Moore stepped out of the shadow like she'd been waiting for her cue. Lena didn't look like hospital staff either. She looked like someone who belonged in a lab at 3 a.m., surrounded by evidence bags and quiet machines. Brilliant eyes, introspective stillness, the kind of calm that didn't need dominance because it assumed it would be listened to. Captain Hayes, Lena replied, voice even. This is escalating. Maria's jaw tightened. It was already escalating. You just chose now to show up. Lena's gaze moved to Ethan. Officer Cole, the phrase you used, where did you learn it? Ethan held her eyes calm and disciplined, giving nothing away. In training. Lena's expression didn't change, but something in her pupils narrowed. That's not an answer. Ethan's voice remained steady. It's the only answer you get in a hallway with a dying man. Behind them, the surgeon called out, We're moving to surgery now. The gurney shifted. Shadow rose and moved with it like a shadow made solid. He didn't block the surgeons, he didn't snap. But he tracked Lena. That detail landed in Ethan's gut like a warning. Shadow didn't see Lena as medical staff. Shadow saw Lena as pressure. Maria watched the dog's focus and exhaled slowly. We don't have time for politics, she said to Lena. A man is bleeding out. We don't have time for loose ends, Lena replied. Her voice stayed gentle, almost sympathetic, but Ethan heard the steel beneath it. If that code is active, we have a breach, and breaches get people killed. Ethan's pulse stayed slow by discipline, not by comfort. He's already dying, Ethan said. If you want to talk about killing, start with the people who put him on that gurney and ran. Lena's eyes flicked, just once, toward the surgical doors. Maria seized the moment. Cole, she said, walk with me. Ethan didn't hesitate. He followed her 2 steps down the corridor, close enough to talk without giving Lena the room. Maria's voice dropped. Tell me the truth. Do you know what that phrase is tied to? Ethan held her gaze. I know it's retired. Maria's eyes didn't blink. Retired doesn't mean forgotten. Not to the people who buried it. Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. You brought a helicopter. Maria's expression sharpened. No, the helicopter brought itself. That wasn't reassurance. That was a warning. Lucas approached, trying to look useful without getting in the way. Captain, admin's asking about footage, and there's a request from someone claiming oversight. Lena heard her name without it being spoken. She stepped closer. Maria turned toward her. You're not taking footage. Lena's tone was calm. If we don't control the narrative, someone else will. Ethan's eyes flicked to Shadow, who was now sitting near the surgical doors, like a sentry, ears forward. The dog's gaze bounced between Ethan and the door, then returned to Lena. A silent conversation. Shadow was telling Ethan, she's not here to help. Ethan felt his decision settle like weight. Whatever was coming, he wasn't going to let a hospital become a cleanup site. Maria stepped in front of Lena fully now. You want control, Maria said quietly. Then control yourself, because if you put your hands on this hospital's cameras without legal authority, you'll answer to me. Lena's eyes remained steady. I have authority. Maria's smile was humorless. Not here. The tension between them was old, deep, not personal, but institutional. 2 people who'd seen what secrecy did to good intentions. Ethan looked between them and spoke once, carefully. The patient, what's his name? Maria paused. Not yours to know, she said. Ethan's eyes didn't leave hers. If he wakes up, he'll need someone he can trust. And so will the dog. Maria's gaze softened a fraction. You already earned the dog. Ethan's voice stayed level. That's not what I asked. Maria hesitated, then gave him the smallest nod, like a compromise between compassion and protocol. We'll talk after he's stable. Lena stepped forward again, voice quiet, dangerous in its restraint. No, we talk now. Because if he wakes up and says the wrong thing, it won't just be footage. It will be headlines, congressional interest, careers, lives. Ethan held her gaze. Then maybe you should be more worried about why he's on that gurney in the first place. Lena's face remained composed, but her eyes flashed. Just once. Maria leaned into Ethan. "Cole," she murmured, "if Lena decides you're a liability, she won't do it loud, she'll do it clean." Ethan felt cold clarity. "Then we keep it loud," he said. Maria's eyes narrowed. "What does that mean?" Ethan looked toward the surgical doors. "It means we make sure the truth happens in front of witnesses." Shadow let out a low breath, almost approval, and above them, far down the hall, another elevator ding sounded. Like the night was still moving pieces. Surgery swallowed the gurney like a mouth. The double doors swung shut, and for a moment the corridor felt too quiet. Like the building had inhaled and refused to exhale until it knew whether the man inside would live. Ethan stayed where he was, close enough that Shadow could see him if the dog lifted his head, far enough that no one could accuse him of interfering with the medical team. Shadow sat just outside the surgical doors, posture perfect, eyes forward, ears rotating in small, precise increments to catalog every sound that mattered. The dog wasn't anxious. The dog was working. Lucas hovered a step behind Ethan, hands on his duty belt as if gripping it would keep him anchored. "Cole," Lucas whispered, "I've never seen a dog do that. Like a switch, like you had a remote control." Ethan didn't take his eyes off the corridor. "It wasn't a remote," he murmured. "It was trust." Lucas blinked. Trust from a dog that almost bit a surgeon. Ethan finally glanced at him. "You didn't see fear in Shadow's eyes. You saw discipline. That's a dog trained to protect a partner, not a dog losing its mind." Lucas swallowed and looked toward the surgical doors again, where the faint sound of shouted orders leaked through the seams. "So what now?" Ethan's gaze drifted down the hallway toward the nurses' station. Hospital staff moved in short, hurried loops, pretending it was routine. They were trying to reset the night back into something manageable. Wipe the floor, replace the linens, restock the crash cart. Normality as a shield. But the dark coat problem hadn't left with the gurney. Dr. Lena Moore stood near the nurses' station, half in the light, half in shadow, speaking quietly with a hospital administrator Ethan didn't recognize. Lena held a phone like it was part of her hand, already in motion, already pulling threads. Captain Maria Hayes paced once near the elevator doors, then stopped. She wasn't pacing because she was nervous. She was pacing because she was calculating who had access, what the helicopter meant, what it implied about who had already been alerted. Maria approached Ethan, her steps measured. "You bought us time," she said under her breath. "Not much." Ethan's voice stayed low. "Lena wants the footage." Maria's eyes flicked to Lena. "Lena wants a controlled story. Controlled stories don't leave witnesses." Ethan nodded once. "What's this really about, Captain?" Maria's expression tightened. "It's about the phrase you used." Ethan didn't flinch. He'd known she'd say it again. "It stopped Shadow from getting shot. It also lit up systems that aren't supposed to light up anymore," Maria said. "Retired codes don't trigger alerts unless someone is listening for them." Ethan's jaw shifted slightly. "So someone's listening." Maria's eyes sharpened. "Someone built a listening net. And Lena doesn't show up in a county hospital at 3 a.m. unless she's part of the net." Lucas edged closer, trying to look like he belonged in the conversation. "Captain, admin says—" Maria held up a hand without looking at him. Lucas stopped instantly. Ethan watched Maria closely. "You came because the helicopter came." Maria gave him a thin nod. "I came because I got a call that didn't come through dispatch." Ethan's gaze narrowed. "From who?" Maria hesitated just long enough to confirm what Ethan already suspected. The caller mattered. The kind of caller you didn't name in a public hallway. "A level above all of us," Maria said finally. Ethan's attention snapped back to Lena. Lena's posture remained calm, but her eyes were scanning, measuring Ethan, Maria, Lucas, Shadow. She wasn't a storm. She was the barometric pressure before it. "Why keep him alive?" Ethan asked Maria quietly. Maria looked at him as if he'd asked the wrong question. "You think someone wants him dead?" Ethan didn't answer with words. He answered by pointing with his chin toward the nurse's station. Lena's hand moved, just a subtle gesture, and the administrator nodded, already complicit, already folding under the weight of implied authority. Maria exhaled through her nose. "We're not doing this in the open." Ethan's voice stayed flat. "We are doing this exactly in the open, because if we step into a closed room with Lena, we lose." Maria's gaze sharpened with reluctant respect. "You've done this before." Ethan didn't confirm it. He didn't deny it. He didn't give the hallway any more truth than it needed. A nurse rushed past them toward the surgical doors. Her face was set in that exhausted focus of someone who'd spent too long holding people's lives in her hands. She didn't look at Ethan. She did look at Shadow, and her expression flickered. Fear, then something else. Awe, maybe, or simply the recognition that the dog wasn't a threat. The dog was a promise. Lucas lowered his voice again. "Cole, I heard Lena ask for security logs, like camera access, badge swipes, roof entry. She's building something." Ethan nodded slightly. "She's building a narrative." Maria leaned close enough that Ethan could smell the faint scent of cold air on her jacket. "Cole," she murmured, "if that man dies and Shadow injures someone in the process, Lena gets everything she wants. She'll say, 'Uncontrolled canine, unauthorized phrase, tragic outcome, clean.'" Ethan's eyes stayed on the surgical doors. "Then he doesn't die." Maria held his gaze. "You can't decide that." Ethan's voice didn't change. "Watch me." The corridor fell into a tense, waiting rhythm. Minutes stretched. The hum of fluorescent lights became oppressive. A vending machine clicked somewhere in the distance, as if mocking them with normality. Then Shadow's ears snapped forward in unison. He rose, not frantic, not barking, just rising, body tightening as if a wire had been pulled taut through his spine. Ethan felt it before he saw it, the subtle shift in the air, the way conversations slowed, the way footsteps became careful. Lena moved. She started down the hallway, toward surgery, toward Ethan and Maria, her expression calm as ever. She held her phone out like a badge. She didn't need a uniform if people believed she carried authority. "Captain Hayes," Lena said, voice smooth, "we need to preserve evidence." Maria's shoulders squared. "This is a hospital, Lena." "It's also now a federal incident," Lena replied. Her eyes slid to Ethan. "And you are now central to it." Shadow's gaze locked on Lena, unblinking. The dog didn't growl. He didn't need to. Lena noticed. Her eyes flicked to Shadow's posture, and for the first time her calm looked practiced rather than natural, like she was correcting herself. "Officer Cole," Lena said, "I'm going to ask you one more time. Where did you learn that phrase?" Ethan met her eyes. "In training." Lena's smile was thin. "Then name the instructor." Ethan didn't answer. Maria cut in, sharp. "He doesn't answer to you." Lena's eyes didn't leave Ethan. "If he answers to no one, then we have a problem." Ethan's voice stayed calm. "The only problem in this hall is that you're trying to make this about me instead of the man bleeding behind those doors." Lena's gaze shifted just briefly toward the surgical suite. "The man bleeding behind those doors is going to survive," she said. "Or he won't. Either way, what matters is what comes with him." Ethan's jaw tightened. "And what comes with him?" Lena's eyes glinted. "History." Shadow let out a low breath, a sound so quiet most humans wouldn't have clocked it. Ethan did. It wasn't aggression. It was warning. A nurse pushed through the surgical doors, eyes wide. "We need space," she snapped. "Now." Maria immediately stepped back. Ethan did too. Lena hesitated, then moved, not because she cared about protocol, but because she knew refusing would look wrong. Shadow stayed planted. He watched. And Ethan watched Lena watch. That was the part that bothered him most. Lena wasn't just collecting facts, she was collecting angles. This wasn't an investigation. It was a decision process, keep or erase. Ethan's fingers flexed once at his side. He kept them loose. Calm hands calmed rooms. Maria's voice dropped again. "Cole, I need to know if Lena's right." Ethan looked at her. "About what?" "About you being connected to something buried," Maria said. "Because if you are, and you're standing in my county hospital with that knowledge showing in public, then I need to know what kind of storm I'm holding back." Ethan exhaled slowly. He didn't lie to Maria. He didn't owe Lena anything. But Maria was different. "I'm connected," Ethan said quietly. "Not the way she thinks, but enough that she'll keep pulling." Maria's eyes hardened. Then we stop her pull. Ethan's gaze slid to Shadow again. The dog's attention never wandered. Eyes always on the doors, then Lena, then Ethan. A triangle of loyalty and threat assessment. Lucas swallowed. "Cole, what if she takes you in?" Ethan glanced at him, almost amused, not by the situation, but by Lucas's sincerity. "Then you'll file the paperwork. Try to spell my name right." Lucas's mouth opened, then shut. "Not funny." Ethan's voice softened just a hair. "It's not." Another minute, another stretched breath. Then a surgeon pushed through the doors, mask pulled down, sweat at his temples. "Who's in charge out here?" he demanded, eyes scanning. Maria stepped forward immediately. "I am." The surgeon's gaze flicked to Shadow and then back to Maria. "We stabilized him. Barely. He's going to recovery." Ethan felt his chest loosen a fraction. "However," the surgeon added, "he's fragile. Any spike in stress, any movement, any—" Shadow shifted, as if he understood the word stress. Ethan stepped closer. "Is he conscious?" "Not yet," the surgeon said, "but sedation's light. He might wake in recovery." Ethan's eyes flicked to Lena. Lena's gaze sharpened. "Then we need to control the environment." Maria's voice snapped. "We need to protect the patient." Lena's eyes stayed calm. Sometimes those are the same thing. Ethan heard the implication in Lena's words. Protect the patient could mean silence the patient. He felt something cold settle in his stomach. The gurney rolled out moments later, recovery staff moving fast. Shadow rose and moved with it seamlessly, shoulder brushing the frame, eyes scanning the corridor like a soldier clearing corners. Ethan fell into step, staying on Shadow's flank. Not pulling the dog, not leading, just matching. Lucas jogged to keep up. Maria walked alongside Ethan, posture rigid. Lena followed at a slight distance, like she didn't need to rush because she already assumed she would win. IV. Major turn recovery was quieter than trauma, but carried a different kind of tension. The fragile calm after crisis, when people pretended the worst was over, even though the line between alive and gone was still paper thin. The gurney slid into a bay, curtains half drawn. Machines hummed. The patient lay still, chest rising shallowly, face pale under the lights. Shadow sat instantly at the bedside, positioning himself with precise alignment, body angled toward the doorway, head slightly tilted so he could see both the patient and anyone entering. Ethan stayed just outside the curtain line. He knew enough not to crowd. He also knew Shadow needed to see him. Maria kept her voice low. "Cole," she said, "this is where it gets ugly." Ethan didn't look away from the bay. "It's already ugly." Maria's eyes flicked to Lena. "Lena's going to demand your statement. She's going to demand the phrase. She's going to demand a reason to justify what she's already decided." Ethan's expression didn't change. "And you?" Maria's jaw tightened. "I'm deciding whether to stand between you and her or step aside and let the machine eat you." Ethan finally looked at Maria. "And what do you see?" Maria held his gaze. "I see a man who walked into a room with guns aimed at a K9 and calmed it without force. I see discipline. I see restraint." Her voice lowered further. "I also see someone who carries something old." Ethan said nothing. He let that truth sit. Lena stepped closer, phone still in hand. "Captain Hayes," she said, "I've alerted the appropriate channels. This is now a controlled incident." Maria turned on her. "You alerted channels before the patient even hit recovery." Lena's tone remained gentle. "Time matters." Maria's eyes narrowed. "So does consent." Lena's gaze drifted to Ethan again. "Officer Cole will give a statement, now." Ethan stayed calm. "I won't." Lena's expression didn't shift, but her eyes hardened. "Then you're obstructing." Ethan's voice stayed even. "I'm prioritizing a medical recovery bay over your bureaucracy." Lena took one step closer. Shadow's head lifted, not growling yet, but the air tightened. Ethan raised one hand slightly, not a command, just a quiet cue to Shadow. "I see it too." Shadow stayed seated, but his eyes locked on Lena's. Lena paused, calculating. "Your dog is going to be a problem again," she said softly. Ethan's gaze sharpened. "He's not my dog." Lena's eyes flicked to the patient. "He's the patient's dog, which makes him evidence." Maria's voice turned to steel. "He's not evidence. He's a working partner." Lena's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, then looked back up. Security footage is being requested at a higher level. Hospital admin has been instructed to comply. Maria's face tightened. By who? Lena's smile didn't reach her eyes. By people who don't like surprises. Ethan felt the net tighten again. He didn't have the luxury of guessing. He had to work with what he could control. The patient shifted. A faint twitch of the fingers, a subtle rise in the chest that didn't match the machine's rhythm. Shadow leaned forward instantly, pressing his forehead lightly against the bed frame, eyes fixed on the man's face. Ethan's muscles tightened. The patient's eyelids fluttered. A nurse stepped forward, whispering to another staff member about adjusting sedation. The movement was small, routine, but Lena's attention snapped to it like a predator noticing motion. "Sedate him," Lena said quietly. Maria turned. "That's not your call." Lena's tone remained calm. "It prevents agitation." Ethan's voice cut in, controlled but firm. "It prevents speech." Lena's eyes moved to Ethan. "You're projecting." Ethan didn't blink. Maybe I've seen this movie before." The patient's eyes opened, just a slit at first. Confusion flickered across his face. Pain followed. His breathing hitched as if his body was trying to rise and failing. Shadow let out a low whine and pressed closer, grounding. Ethan stepped to the bedside, staying just behind Shadow's shoulder so he wouldn't trigger the dog's protective instincts. "Easy," Ethan said softly, not as a command, but as a tether. "You're safe." The patient's eyes struggled to focus. They slid across the curtains, the machines, the unfamiliar faces. Then they locked on Ethan. Something changed in the man's expression, not full awareness, but recognition, like a memory surfacing through water. His lips parted. A rasp of sound came out. "Cole," the patient breathed. The bay went still. Lucas froze in the doorway, eyes wide. Maria's posture went rigid. Lena's eyes sharpened like blades. Ethan felt his blood turn cold. The patient hadn't asked for a nurse. He hadn't called for a doctor. He'd said Ethan's name like he'd known it long before tonight. Ethan leaned in slightly, voice low and steady. "Don't talk," he said. "Save your breath." The patient swallowed, eyes locked on Ethan. "You," he rasped, "you're not supposed to—" A cough seized him. His monitor spiked. A nurse reached toward the line to adjust a drip. Lena's voice cut in, sharper now. "Sedate him, now!" Shadow's head snapped toward Lena. The growl came, not loud, not wild, just deep, controlled, and aimed. Not at the nurse, not at the doctor, at Lena. The room froze again, the exact edge Ethan had stepped them away from earlier. Ethan lifted his hand slightly, palm down. "Shadow," he murmured. Shadow didn't move, but the growl softened by a fraction. Ethan turned his head toward Maria without taking his eyes off the patient. "Did you hear that?" Maria's face was tight. "I heard it." Ethan felt the weight of it settle. Whatever Lena had been trying to make this about, the patient had just made it about Ethan. And now the dog was marking Lena as the threat. Lena's gaze stayed steady, but her voice had changed, less smooth, more clipped. "This just escalated." Ethan's voice was calm. "It already did. You just didn't have proof." The patient's breathing hitched again. Shadow pressed his head against the man's hand, and the man's fingers curled weakly into fur like instinct. Ethan watched it and felt something steady in his chest. The dog's loyalty wasn't chaos. It was structure. It was purpose. A nurse whispered urgently, "His blood pressure." The monitor dipped. Ethan's instincts fired. He remembered the earlier missed pocket of bleeding. He remembered Shadow's whine and where his head had angled. Ethan turned to the surgeon on duty here, unnamed, tired, competent. "Recheck his left side," Ethan said. "Now?" The surgeon frowned. "We stabilized." "Recheck," Ethan repeated, voice still controlled but leaving no space for argument. Lena's eyes narrowed. "You don't give medical orders." Ethan didn't look at her. "I give survival orders when people start pushing sedation before stability." Maria's eyes flicked to the surgeon. "Do it," she said. Authority landed. The surgeon moved. The nurse lifted the sheet, hands pressed carefully along the bandaged region. The patient's face tightened in pain, but he didn't thrash. Shadow was there, grounding him. Then the surgeon's expression changed. "Damn," he muttered. "He's leaking again." The room tightened. Ethan's gaze snapped to Lena. Lena's face remained composed, but her eyes had that tiny flicker of irritation, like a plan had been delayed. Ethan felt cold clarity. Whether Lena had intended harm or simply intended control, the outcome would have been the same. Sedate him hard, keep him quiet, and if he slipped, it became complications, not murder, just paperwork. Ethan's voice stayed even, but his eyes were hard. "Get him stabilized," he said to the medical team. "Now, in front of everyone." Shadow's growl stopped. He sat back down again, as if satisfied that Ethan had identified the threat and redirected the room. Maria's jaw tightened. She looked at Lena. "You were going to push sedation." Lena's voice didn't tremble. "I was going to prevent agitation." Ethan finally turned fully toward Lena. "You were going to prevent words." Lena's expression cooled. "Be careful, Officer Cole." Ethan's voice stayed calm. "You should take your own advice." The medical team moved fast. Pressure, clamp, reevaluation, controlled urgency. The patient's vitals wavered, then steadied. When the immediate crisis passed, the bay felt like it had survived a second ambush. Lucas exhaled shakily. "Cole, he knew you." Ethan didn't answer. He couldn't, not with Lena listening. Maria stepped closer to Ethan, voice low enough that only he could hear. "Cole," she said, "Lena can't spin that away." Ethan's eyes stayed on the patient. "She'll try." Maria nodded once. "Then we don't let her." The patient drifted in and out, caught between sedation and pain. His eyes opened again briefly. This time he didn't fight the haze as hard. He looked at Ethan like he was trying to confirm Ethan was real. "Where?" the patient rasped. Ethan leaned in, voice quiet. "Hospital. You're alive. Don't push." The patient swallowed. "You shouldn't be here." Ethan's eyes tightened. "Neither should you, from what I can tell." The patient's mouth twitched, almost a humorless smile. "Shadow?" he breathed. Shadow's ears perked. He leaned in, pressing his head gently against the man's wrist. The patient's fingers curled into the fur again, weak but certain. "Good boy." Lena watched it like she was witnessing a code phrase being spoken aloud. Her gaze was sharp, clinical. Maria stepped forward. "Tell me," she said to the patient, "how do you know Officer Cole?" The patient's eyes shifted toward Maria, then back to Ethan. His throat worked. Ethan felt the moment tighten. This was the line. If the patient spoke, the buried thing became public. If the patient didn't, Lena would keep pushing until she got what she wanted anyway. The patient's voice came out low, scraped raw. "He pulled us out." Maria's brow furrowed. "Pulled you out of what?" The patient blinked slowly, fighting the fog. "A situation that wasn't supposed to exist." Lena's voice cut in, smooth but cold. "You're disoriented. Do not indulge delusions." Shadow's head snapped toward Lena. A low growl rolled out again, controlled but unmistakable. The patient's eyes sharpened, and for the first time there was something like anger behind the haze. "Not delusion," he rasped. "Ghost team, night, no insignia. Ethan's voice went quiet, firm. "Stop." The patient's gaze locked on Ethan. "You saved us," he whispered, "and you disappeared." Ethan felt the weight of it slam into the room. Lucas's mouth fell open. Maria's expression tightened, shock, then comprehension, then a deep anger at the fact that this was happening in her hospital. Lena's eyes narrowed. "Enough," she said sharply. "Sedate him fully." Maria turned on her. "No," Lena's voice stayed steady. "He's compromising classified material." Ethan's tone was calm, but his eyes were ice. "He's a patient. He's compromised because he's bleeding." Lena stepped closer, phone in hand. "Captain Hayes, step aside." Maria didn't move. "You don't run my floor." Lena's gaze flicked to Ethan again. "Officer Cole is the problem." Shadow rose. He didn't lunge. He didn't bark. He simply stood and placed his body between Lena and the bed, muscles coiled, eyes locked. A living wall. The message was clear. One more step and you won't like the outcome. The room froze. Not because Shadow was wild, because Shadow was controlled. Controlled enough that everyone understood he would do exactly what he was trained to do. Protect. Ethan stepped into the gap, not touching Shadow, not grabbing him, just placing himself beside the dog, hand hovering close enough to signal partnership. His voice was low. "Lena," he said, using her name like a boundary line, "you are not taking this room." Lena's eyes held his. "You don't have the authority to stop me." Ethan's gaze didn't waver. I have the authority to keep people alive. That's what I'm doing. Lena's phone buzzed again. She glanced down. Maria watched her, eyes sharp. Who's calling you? Lena didn't answer. She looked back up, expression tighter now, like she'd received new instructions or a warning. Ethan spoke quietly to Maria without taking his eyes off Lena. This is where you decide. Maria's jaw clenched. Decide what? Ethan's voice was controlled. Whether your badge is real or decorative. Maria stared at him for a half second. Then she moved. She pulled her phone out and made a call, fast, decisive. No hesitation, no asking permission. Her voice was quiet but sharp as a blade. This is Captain Hayes. I need immediate confirmation of jurisdiction over an active incident. Yes, right now. Lena's expression changed, just slightly, as if she recognized the tone. Maria wasn't calling local admin. Maria was calling up the chain. And Lena could hear the rattle of that chain. The patient moaned softly, and Shadow's attention flicked back to him for a split second, then returned to Lena, maintaining the barrier. Maria finished the call and looked at Lena with something like grim satisfaction. Step back, Maria said. Lena's eyes narrowed. You don't know what you're doing. Maria's voice stayed calm, pragmatic, unshakable. I know exactly what I'm doing. I'm keeping this hospital from becoming your cleanup room. Lena's jaw tightened. You're making a mistake. Maria lifted her phone slightly. No, you did. Lena's phone buzzed again. She checked it. Her face stayed composed, but color drained from it by a fraction, so small most people wouldn't notice. Ethan noticed, because Ethan lived in the world of small tells. Lena's eyes lifted slowly. She looked at Ethan, then Maria, then Shadow, then the patient. She exhaled, controlled, measured, like someone swallowing a loss. Fine, Lena said, for now. She stepped back one pace. Shadow did not move. Ethan didn't relax. Maria's voice didn't soften. You don't touch footage. You don't touch this patient. You don't push sedation for anything except medical necessity. Lena's eyes glinted. This isn't finished. Ethan's response was quiet. It is for tonight. Lena held his gaze for a long beat, then turned and walked out of the bay, her coat trailing behind her like a closing curtain. The air in the room shifted, like pressure releasing. Lucas exhaled, shaky. Captain, what just happened? Maria didn't look at him. You just watched someone used to winning get told no. Ethan turned back to the patient. The man's eyes were half open, drifting again. He looked at Ethan with a question he didn't have the strength to ask. Ethan leaned in, voice low. Rest, he said. I'll handle the rest. The patient's fingers curled weakly into Shadow's fur again. Shadow lowered his head and pressed it gently against the patient's wrist, as if sealing the promise. The next hour was a slow, careful walk along the edge of disaster. Doctors stabilized the patient fully. No more dips, no more sudden spikes. The lines and drips settled into a steady rhythm that meant alive was no longer a temporary condition. Shadow never left. At one point, a nurse tried to offer water for the dog, moving slowly with a bowl. Shadow's eyes tracked the movement, then flicked to Ethan. Ethan gave the smallest nod. Shadow allowed it. Lucas watched with quiet amazement. He listens to you, Ethan's voice was soft. He listens to truth. Maria pulled Ethan aside, still within sight of Shadow, still within the open space of the bay. No closed doors, no private corners. Cole, she said quietly, you just created a file that's going to follow you. Ethan met her eyes. It was following me already. Maria studied him. Lena's not going to stop. She'll pivot. She'll use different channels, different angles. Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. Then we keep doing what we did tonight. Maria's expression hardened. Which is? Ethan's voice didn't change. We keep it in the light. We keep it documented. We keep witnesses. Maria exhaled slowly. Someone's going to offer you a deal. Ethan's eyes narrowed. A deal? Maria nodded, grim. To make this go away. To pull you into a role where you're controlled, where your skills are useful and your mouth is quiet. Ethan glanced toward the patient, then Shadow, then back to Maria. And what do you think I'll do? Maria's gaze softened a fraction. I think you'll say no. Ethan nodded once. Then you already know the ending. Lucas drifted closer, trying to be subtle and failing. So, we're good? Maria looked at him. Deputy Reed, define good. Lucas swallowed. A live patient. Dog not shot. Nobody sued yet. Ethan let out the faintest breath that almost counted as a laugh. That's as close as we get tonight. Maria's gaze shifted to Shadow. The dog lay curled beside the bed now, one paw touching the frame, eyes half-lidded but alert, the posture of a guardian who would rather die than fail. Maria's voice turned quiet. He's going to need a handler. Ethan's eyes stayed on Shadow. He already has one, even if the man can't stand yet. Maria hesitated. And if someone tries to separate them? Ethan's face didn't change, but his tone hardened. Then someone's going to learn what loyalty costs. Maria held his gaze, then nodded slowly. That's what I was afraid you'd say. Ethan looked at her. You called it fear. I call it a boundary. Maria exhaled. Cole, when this settles, you're going to get a meeting request. Ethan didn't ask from who. He already knew the type. Maria watched him closely. They'll offer protection. Ethan's eyes flicked to Shadow, then the patient's pale face, then the steady beep of the monitor. Protection always comes with a leash, Ethan said. Maria's expression tightened. Sometimes leashes keep you alive. Ethan's voice was calm, disciplined. I'm alive, and so is he. That's enough. The next hour was a slow, careful walk along the edge of disaster. Doctors stabilized the patient fully. No more dips, no more sudden spikes. The lines and drips settled into a steady rhythm that meant alive was no longer a temporary condition. Shadow never left. At one point, a nurse tried to offer water for the dog, moving slowly with a bowl. Shadow's eyes tracked the movement, then flicked to Ethan. Ethan gave the smallest nod. Shadow allowed it. Lucas watched with quiet amazement. He listens to you. Ethan's voice was soft. He listens to truth. Maria pulled Ethan aside, still within sight of Shadow, still within the open space of the bay. No closed doors, no private corners. Cole, she said quietly, you just created a file that's going to follow you. Ethan met her eyes. It was following me already. Maria studied him. Lena's not going to stop. She'll pivot. She'll use different channels, different angles. Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. Then we keep doing what we did tonight. Maria's expression hardened. Which is? Ethan's voice didn't change. We keep it in the light. We keep it documented. We keep witnesses. Maria exhaled slowly. Someone's going to offer you a deal. Ethan's eyes narrowed. A deal? Maria nodded, grim. To make this go away, to pull you into a role where you're controlled, where your skills are useful, and your mouth is quiet. Ethan glanced toward the patient, then Shadow, then back to Maria. And what do you think I'll do? Maria's gaze softened a fraction. I think you'll say no. Ethan nodded once. Then you already know the ending. Lucas drifted closer, trying to be subtle and failing. So, we're good? Maria looked at him. Deputy Reed, define good. Lucas swallowed. A live patient. Dog not shot. Nobody sued yet. Ethan let out the faintest breath that almost counted as a laugh. That's as close as we get tonight. Maria's gaze shifted to Shadow. The dog lay curled beside the bed now, one paw touching the frame. Eyes half-lidded but alert, the posture of a guardian who would rather die than fail. Maria's voice turned quiet. He's going to need a handler. Ethan's eyes stayed on Shadow. He already has one, even if the man can't stand yet. Maria hesitated. And if someone tries to separate them? Ethan's face didn't change, but his tone hardened. Then someone's going to learn what loyalty costs. Maria held his gaze, then nodded slowly. That's what I was afraid you'd say. Ethan looked at her. You called it fear. I call it a boundary. Maria exhaled. Cole, when this settles, you're going to get a meeting request. Ethan didn't ask from who. He already knew the type. Maria watched him closely. They'll offer protection. Ethan's eyes flicked to Shadow, then the patient's pale face, then the steady beep of the monitor. Protection always comes with a leash, Ethan said. Maria's expression tightened. Sometimes leashes keep you alive. Ethan's voice was calm, disciplined. I'm alive, and so is he. That's enough. Maria studied him for a long moment, then nodded, pragmatic acceptance. Okay, but you don't do this alone. Ethan's gaze shifted to Lucas. I'm not. Lucas straightened, startled. Wait, me? Ethan's eyes held a rare softness. "You stayed. You didn't panic. You listened." Lucas blinked rapidly. I tried not to faint." Ethan's mouth twitched faintly. "Good baseline." Maria's phone buzzed. She checked it, expression unreadable, then looked at Ethan. "She's gone," Maria said. Ethan knew she meant Lena, for tonight at least. Maria's voice lowered. "But she'll be back in some other form. Paperwork, committees, quiet pressure." Ethan nodded once. "Then we stay steady." Maria watched the bay one more time. The patient slept. Shadow breathed in slow, controlled rhythm beside him, matching the bed's mechanical hum like they were synced. Maria's voice softened into something like respect. "You did good," she said quietly. "Not because you won, because you didn't become them." Ethan didn't reply. He didn't need to. He stepped to the bedside and lowered his voice, speaking where only Shadow might register it. "Stay," he murmured. Shadow's ear flicked. His tail thumped once against the floor. Subtle, expressive, loyal. Ethan straightened and looked through the recovery bay glass into the corridor beyond, where the hospital had returned to its almost normal night rhythm. Fluorescent lights, quiet footsteps, distant beeps, ordinary life. And yet the night had tried to turn this place into a battlefield and failed, because an officer chose restraint over force, truth over convenience, light over shadow. Integrity isn't heroic because it's loud, it's heroic because it's harder. Because when secrecy offers you a cleaner ending, integrity makes you stand in the mess, keep the patient breathing, keep the witnesses present, and refuse to become the monster the system would prefer. The hospital settled into its pre-dawn lull the way a city did after a storm, careful, tentative, as if afraid to wake something it didn't understand. Ethan stayed. He didn't lean against the wall, didn't sit. He stood with his weight balanced evenly, hands relaxed at his sides, eyes moving in slow, deliberate passes. The kind of stillness that came from long practice, not boredom, not tension, but readiness without hunger. Shadow mirrored him in his own way. The dog lay curled beside the bed, flank rising and falling in steady rhythm, but sleep never fully claimed him. One eye stayed half open. One ear tracked sound. The world might have relaxed, but Shadow hadn't been trained for comfort. He'd been trained for continuity, stay until released. Lucas returned with 2 paper cups of coffee at some point, holding them like they were fragile evidence. "I didn't know what you'd take," Lucas whispered. Ethan accepted one without looking. "I take whatever's hot." Lucas nodded like that meant something profound and leaned against the wall a few feet away. He watched Shadow for a long moment. "You know," Lucas said quietly, "I always thought K-9 stories were, big gestures, tackles, teeth, the dramatic stuff." Ethan took a slow sip. "That's for people watching from the outside." Lucas tilted his head. "What's it like from the inside?" Ethan glanced at Shadow, then at the patient's steady vitals. "It's quiet, and it's heavy, because when it goes wrong, it's not dramatic. It's just permanent." Lucas absorbed that, eyes flicking back to the bed. He almost didn't make it. Ethan nodded once. Almost is where the truth lives. Minutes passed, then more. A nurse came and went, machines hummed. Dawn light began to creep in through a narrow window at the end of the corridor, soft, pale, unwelcome at first, like a witness arriving late. Captain Maria Hayes returned once more, stopping just outside the bay. She didn't interrupt. She simply observed. After a while, she spoke quietly. "I've documented everything. Witness statements, timeline, medical necessity. Lena won't like it." Ethan's response was mild. "She doesn't have to." Maria studied him. "You could still step away from this. Take a leave. Let it cool." Ethan looked at the patient. "If I leave, the room cools in the wrong direction." Maria nodded slowly. "That's what I thought you'd say." She hesitated, then added, "The offer will come anyway." Ethan finally met her eyes. "And I'll refuse it anyway." Maria's lips curved, not into a smile, but into something like respect that had learned not to need approval. "Then I'll make sure refusing it doesn't ruin you." Ethan inclined his head slightly. The patient stirred again just before sunrise. This time, it wasn't panic. It wasn't pain. It was awareness. His eyes opened and stayed open. Shadow rose immediately, posture soft but alert, pressing close without crowding. The patient's gaze drifted until it landed on the dog, and something eased in his face, something that had nothing to do with medication. "Hey," the man rasped. Shadow leaned in. Ethan stepped closer, keeping his voice low. "Easy. You're stable. You're not going anywhere." The man swallowed. "Dog stayed?" Ethan nodded. "Never left." A faint smile tugged at the corner of the man's mouth. "Knew he wouldn't." His eyes shifted toward Ethan. This time, there was no confusion in them, just recognition and restraint. "I won't talk," the man said quietly. "Not here." Ethan met his gaze. "You don't owe anyone anything right now." The man's fingers brushed Shadow's fur again, slower this time, deliberate. "You kept them from turning this into something else." Ethan didn't deny it. "I kept it honest." The man nodded, eyes closing again, not from sedation, but from trust. Shadow settled back down. The sun climbed higher, and with it came the normal morning staff, fresh faces, unaware eyes, people stepping into a shift that would never quite understand what the building had held overnight. To them, it was a wounded man and a tired dog. To Ethan, it was proof. By mid-morning, Lena Moore was gone, not just from the hospital, but from the narrative. Her absence wasn't loud. It wasn't an admission. It was a withdrawal. Ethan knew better than to think that meant victory. It meant postponement. But postponement was enough when lives were still breathing. Maria left shortly after, pausing at the threshold. "You did the right thing," she said once more, quieter than before. Ethan nodded. "I know." Lucas lingered, awkward, unsure how to exit something that felt larger than him. "Cole," Lucas said, if something like this happens again—" Ethan cut him off gently. "You won't hesitate." Lucas blinked. "How do you know?" Ethan glanced at Shadow. "Because you didn't tonight." Lucas straightened a little, shoulders squaring with something like pride. When Ethan finally stepped out into the daylight, the world looked unchanged. Cars moved. Phones buzzed. People argued about coffee orders and parking tickets and weather forecasts. No one knew how close a hospital corridor had come to becoming a different kind of report. Ethan paused on the steps and let the morning air settle in his lungs. Shadow wasn't with him. Not yet. He was where he belonged. Protecting. Ethan didn't need to look back to know that. He walked toward his cruiser with the same calm, disciplined stride he always carried. No medals, no headlines, no applause. Just integrity that had survived the night. And that was enough.